Shabby, cheap motels with dirty mirrors. I still do not know if what I saw was real or not, but I do know I will never forget it. I have never had any encounters with the supernatural before this event, nor did I afterwards. It was in Motel, California. I was 8 years old, and it was at nighttime that me and my mother decided to stay at a motel for some rest, for we had been up all day and decided to settle on down. The motel we decided to stay at wasn't particularly old or even gloomy looking, and didn't have a history as I can recall, just a normal shabby cheap motel. When my mother was talking to the desk clerk, I felt someone or something watching me. It made me move away from my mother, for my attention was now drawn to a rather large mirror that was across the room. I found myself moving towards the mirror closer and closer, not being able to look away from it for some reason, seemingly having no will over my body. What I saw in the mirror was weird. It was a man who wasn't old nor young. He just had a strange look on his face, somewhat sad, as he stared down at me. It actually took me a moment to realize that the man I was looking at was actually my mother's boyfriend, and I just remember being so confused as to why he was stuck in that mirror with that strange look on his face, as if he knew something I didn't, something bad. It felt like a long time had passed with us just staring at one another, not moving. I wasn't scared, well, maybe a little, but I was actually more shocked than scared and confused as well. Finally, I found my voice and called after my mother, telling her I just saw Jason, her boyfriend, in the mirror. But in the blink of the eye, he was gone, leaving me with my confused mother and myself, who asked me if I was just tired. After that night, I dismissed it as just another hallucination, because at the time, Jason was alive and well. It was only 4 weeks later that my mother told me that Jason had gone ran over, walking home from some job interview. Motel 6 in Anna. In my early teens, a long time ago, I began seeing spirits. Maybe I had been seeing them before and simply brushed them off as figments of my overactive imagination, but all I know is my early teens is when I remember them being really noticeable. They started off as blurs, barely distinguishable by the corners of my eyes, to shadowed figures that only appeared for seconds at a time, and eventually, they took on the forms of full-blown apparitions. I should probably that originally, in the very beginning, I only really saw them at nighttime. Recently, however, I've been noticing them in broad daylight. This experience is about a room with some of the most spiritual activity I've ever encountered, and a lost girl I'll call Anna. Around December of 2014, my family and I traveled from Kissimmee, Florida to Vancouver, Washington. We were hoping for a fresh start after some family drama that had happened between my mother and her mother, and hopefully, well, a better living space for us all. My father had gotten an offer from an old employer of his that would pay handsomely, and after a few days' deliberation, we decided to go for it. It was quite a long trip, especially when you consider that the fact that I live in a 7-person family, but it was made easier by the fact that we had 2 vehicles at the time. Now, I won't bore you with insignificant details, so I'll just start at when we finally got there. Our first day there, we were broke. My mother called up my father's new employer, and he agreed to give us an advance on my father's pay in exchange for taking it from his first check. We agreed and set out to look for a decent hotel to spend the next week or so while we looked for a home to buy. My mother didn't want to buy a home without first being able to see it in person. Unfortunately, if if you've ever been to Washington, you know that it is crazy expensive. After about the fourth hotel that was trying to charge $100 a night, we settled on at Motel 6. The room was fairly nice, and actually pretty spacey for a Motel 6. It had 2 double-size, full-size bed on the right. I'm sorry for not being able to be more specific. I don't know much about bed sizes, and on the left, it had a large TV, along with a dresser and stand it sat upon. Straight ahead was the sink area, with a wide mirror that stretched along the entire counter in sink vicinity. There was a microwave on the counter next to the sink, and a little nook in front of it, which had the hanger area. Directly right to the sink was the bathroom. The bathroom was very small, with only a toilet and the standard shower and tub combination. Before I go any further with the story, I would like to mention that my brother and my mother are sensitive to spirits as well. My mother can communicate with the deceased through photos of them in life, and has recently started to do readings. However, she doesn't actually see them like my brother and myself. While I actually seem to attract more female and child spirits, my brother seems to attract the more malicious ones. He actually has many spirits and stories of his own, but those are another story. Maybe I will get his permission to post them. However, case in point, I'm not the only spiritually gifted in my family. Anyhow, the first few nights were pretty tame if I remember correctly. I am a firm believer in debunking whatever can be debunked. I am a wimp of the highest degree, and I sure didn't want to scare myself over something that could be explained. So at first, most of the strange occurrences could be debunked by the neighbors. Footsteps, voices, strange bumping. All of it was put down to the people in the other rooms, right? In fact, I actually believe that most of it probably was. I was content until what was probably the 4th night. Please keep in mind that my family spent over a year in that motel room, so I may sometimes get the timelines crisscrossed, you know. If you notice it, please don't be afraid to point it out. Around the 4th night, I started noticing a man. I would only notice him at night, usually when everyone else was sleeping, and he would stand in a dark corner where our jackets hung and stare at everyone sleeping. I didn't get a bad vibe, more I felt like he was watching over them. I would try to stealthily stare him down, though all I could make out was that he wore a leather jacket and a fedora. I will point out that at the moment, 2 of my siblings shared one of the beds, the one closer to the bathroom and therefore the man, while myself and 2 other siblings had cots on the floor. We used to rotate, but I felt more comfortable on the my cots, as I was hidden from view. My cot was next to my parents' bed, closest to the door, and right next to a table that was in front of the window. At first, I didn't tell anyone about the man, despite the fact that my brother sees them as well, and my mother can communicate with them. It scares my siblings, and my mom hadn't fully embraced her gift yet. If me or my brother tried to tell her about the strange people we would see in random places, she would listen, but not much else. Keep in mind that at the time, I myself was just coming to accept the fact that maybe the people I saw weren't just daydreams or figments of my imagination. So, I kept it quiet for a long period of time. Sometime around mid-spring of 2015, things had changed. My mom had finally decided to embrace her gifts, and I'd finally told my family about the man with the fedora. Surprisingly, after I finally told my family about him, I stopped seeing him regularly. In fact, I only saw him 2 more times that I can recall after that. I kinda got the feeling that he didn't want them to know about him. All I know is that he pretty much disappeared after that. However, now that I've told you all the background you need to know, I can finally tell you about the spirit that made the most impact on me throughout my stay in Motel 6. Her name was Anna, and I noticed her first. It was a while after Fedora Man had disappeared before I noticed that someone else had taken his spot. She would wait in the corner for hours at a time, before I would finally hear the soft padding of her footsteps come across the room to my cot. Originally, she would only come about halfway, and sometimes she would even crawl. She scared the daylights out of me, as all I knew was that she was a spirit that would come to me at night. Eventually, I began to gather enough courage to actually look at her. The first thing I noticed was that her hair was long and dark in colored, tangled beyond belief, with what seemed to be twigs and leaves sticking out in various places. Her skin was streaked with dirt, and when she smiled at me, I could see her teeth rotting. She wore nothing but a long whitish nightgown that was, like the rest of her, covered in dirt and tears in the fabric. Her feet were dirty and bare, and for the tiniest of moments, I thought of a person running through the woods. The person was desperate. All I knew was that they couldn't be caught by the bad man chasing them. They just couldn't. Numerous branches whipped them in the face, with rocks and with sticks tearing at their feet, but still they kept running on. Just as quickly, I was back in the present, and Anna was still there, just smiling at me. I quickly hid beneath my blankets and tried to feign sleep. The next day, I told my brother about Anna and was surprised to hear him say that he hadn't seen her yet. But then he told me that he had been dreaming about her. He said that she didn't like him, and she was always glaring and angry whenever he saw her. He also said that he kept seeing what seemed to be the woods, and that was where he usually saw her in his dreams. I was baffled. Why would Anna hate my brother when she was so nice to me? The cycle continued for a long while. I would see Anna, and she would treat me almost gently, doing things such as humming and sitting by my head. She seemed to like me, and she gave off almost a maternal feel sometimes, though at other times, she seemed to be not so happy to see me. She would stay far away in her corner and not approach me for days. Eventually, I asked my mother for help. I wanted answers. Who was Anna? Why was she so attached and affectionate with me and only me? And why did she dislike my brother? What happened to her? And why does she look like the way she does? So, at my mother's request, I drew a picture of her, and my mother sent it to her psychic friends. To be honest, I wasn't expecting much. Boy, was I wrong. By the next day, we already had 3 replies, with all of them saying the exact same thing. Her name was Anna or Hannah. For some reason though, Anna is the name that resonates with me, and it is what I've been stuck calling her. And she seemed to have been neglected in life. She died an awful death, and she seemed to like me because I remind her of a sister she once had. She's also jealous of me because I have the family she's always wanted, but could never have. My mind was actually blown. That was much more information than what I was expecting, and I was truly glad to finally know a little bit more about this Anna. Soon after knowing about Anna, I stopped seeing Anna. I mean, I could occasionally sense her, but for the most part, she stopped appearing in front of me. I got the feeling she was ashamed. It was almost like she was afraid I would dislike her after learning a bit more about her. But I also got this feeling of overwhelming relief, as if she was glad that I put her out there. Soon after, I learned why. Recently, my mother was contacted by a psychic detective. The detective claimed that Anna has shown up at her home, and she had some information we might find useful. What I'm about to tell you might sound crazy or even fictional, but I promise you that this is the truth. According to the detective, with the help of my mother, Anna seems to have been a child of incest and died a sad death sometime in the early 1920s. They say that she was neglected and possibly sexually abused by a relative, probably the father, and might have been killed off to keep it a secret. When prompted, we were all shocked to learn that Anna led the detective straight to my great-grandmother's land, a woodsy area in Georgia. My mother had told us stories of how way back when my great-uncle would tell her about how they have a pond in the woods somewhere, the perfect place to dump a body and have no one find it. I almost couldn't believe it. However, it explains so much. Why Anna attached to me, why she dislikes my brother, or rather men in general, and both her affection and her jealousy. The detective is still looking for more information on Anna, and I myself eagerly await her answers. I will try to draw Anna for you and post it here. Please tell me what you think. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts in the comments. If anyone needs something clarified as well, don't be afraid to ask. Thank you for reading my experience. Graveyard shift sightings. I work third shift at a local motel and have been there for over 7 months. Over the winter time, I got adjusted to the strange things that come with working in the motel business. Even being awake at 4 a.m. still can be a strange time to be awake. Some things that happen, though, aren't very easy to explain, like lights that seem to flash in response to questions, rooms that haven't been occupied for days suddenly coming to life with the radios turned up to full volume, doors that seem like they're being held from the other side, and lastly, catching spirit orbs on security cameras and my cell phone. The exit sign lights had been acting strange. I first noticed them blinking rapidly at first, and then slowing down to a few blinks a minute. My friend Tom stopped by to visit that night while my wife Kate and I were having dinner at work. While finishing some work, behind the desk, a light from the security camera monitor caught my attention. It was the exit sign from the south side of the building blinking at me. At first, we brushed it off as a camera malfunction, but Tom, who is naturally eccentric, asked the screen, "Can you see us?" The light turned off completely. Eyes wide, our hearts racing, Tom asked, "Do you want us to leave?" The light blinked rapidly. We finished our dinner in the lobby. Kate left afterwards, urging us to ignore it. After watching TV for a while and following Kate's warnings, curiosity got the better of us. Tom waited behind the desk, watching the monitor, while I ventured upstairs. Walking all the way down the hall to the light, I heard music coming from a room, the room closest to the light. 223. I checked the room rack on the clerk desk, only to find that 223 was vacant and had been so for the past 3 days. Armed with the master key, Tom and I went into the room at the end of the hallway. The room was unusually cold, being able to see our breath inside the room. The clock radio was not set to alarm, but was sounding almost at full volume. We checked the radio, turned it off, and double-checked to make sure there was no alarm set. After we finished checking the room, we headed back downstairs and tried to rationalize what had just happened. After 20 minutes later, I was calm enough to do a walk around of the building. After checking the bottom floors, I moved to the stairway opposite from room 223 and tried to open the door, and it would not budge. I don't run into too many things that won't move when I try to use them, so I planted my feet and gave it another shot. The door moved about 2 inches and wouldn't give anymore. I wrote this off as just a coincidence. A few days later, Kate had come back to have dinner with me again, and after a while, we noticed that the light on the security cameras was flashing again. This time, we decided to experiment with it a little bit, so I asked Kate to go upstairs. While she walked up there, I watched the security monitors. I noticed that the lights flashed only when she wasn't looking in its direction. We tried a few more times with similar results. We both got more than a little spooked out by this, and left it alone for a while. A few months have gone by, and it was a pretty stormy night when I next noticed the presence. I was studying at my laptop when I noticed something moving on the security display. I was amazed to see a glowing white orb move about on the camera display. I looked closer to see an almost semicircular shape. It moved about erratically on the screen, sometimes leaving the edge of the camera's sight. I grabbed my cell phone and recorded the monitor and still have the video. I tried to ignore the orb as it had been playing for almost 10 minutes when I heard a solid thump from the back door. It sounded to me almost like somebody running their shoulder into the door, not a sharp sound at all, but almost like a heavy force against the other side. This only happened 2 or 3 times, but it was enough to make me feel very uneasy. Since then, it's been about 2 weeks at the time of this posting, and things have been mostly quiet. I have no idea what to make of this presence. All I know is that something is definitely there, and it likes to make itself known.